Hi, welcome. This is part 2 of me reviewing SBS's Living Black program, and the episode is Corrupting Black Business, which is a look at fake Indigenous businesses across Australia, positioning themselves as Indigenous owned to win work as an Indigenous business. The question is, how Indigenous is it? And that's what we're about to find out, and sort of give a bit of a commentary from my perspective, if it's as bad as it seems or if it's not that bad at all. So hope you enjoy. Could wait for these ads. Why they have English or like American ads on Australian TV? I just feel like they don't really fly. Why am I even listening to this? Come on, ads. Back. Let's go.
Hi,
Here we go.
How are you going?
Oh, wow. Straight into it.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you
Ads.
so much for inviting me and having me here. Wouldn't mind lemongrass and ginger tea.
Yeah, sure. I knew you were coming. I've got one for you.
Fantastic. And you've got the factory next door.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to come have a
Yes,
look around?
that'd be great.
Question: does she actually drink lemongrass tea? That's the real question.
Great, thank you.
Ooh, a little screenshot.
So we got our Petro here. That's
Not gonna lie, anything with Indigenous artwork that has pink in it, I just love. Look at this. I don't know what it is. It just pops. It just pops. Anyway, continuing on.
looks after all our organic roast. So it's the only organic machine. We have our little decaf machine, and then the big Probat that does all our heavy lifting. We do between 10 and 12 tonne a week out of the Probat.
Adam Williams' 100% Indigenous-owned businesses, Supply Oz and Bungie Enterprises, are doing well in Brisbane. He's also the chair of the Murray Business Chamber. Adam says he's frequently approached about joining a company which wants to claim to be Indigenous in order to gain contracts.
I would get at least one a fortnight, sometimes a random request or a phone call or a meeting for a coffee from a person outside of our sector to say, hey, can you join with me here to do this? I'll do all the work and I'll pay you. We have a blank.
Same here. So that is pretty common, especially if you build yourself on credibility and you take the long road to build your businesses, which just take time. Building businesses take time. You will get a lot of opportunities to partner with an existing larger business that you can start winning work as an Indigenous business. So that's why you probably see, like, all of a sudden in the construction space or facilities management spaces where they're relying on, deliverables and service SLAs where they might write in Indigenous give back or involvement. It's a lot easier for those businesses, non-Indigenous businesses, to partner with someone than having to engage an independent business to then work together to win the work. That is a lot harder. So it's a bit like snakes and ladders, though. So you can roll the dice, but you might land on a snake, and you'll be back to square one. And also people will be like, oh, you're the fellow that did that business. So it's not advice to Indigenous business people or young professionals looking to start a business is slow and steady. It's the rabbit and the turtle. Slow and steady wins the race.
Blanket no to that approach. I'd probably be I'd have a lot more money in my bank if I said yes to all these deals, but we say no to them. And what's frustrating is usually within a 6 to 8 week period, we'll see exactly what was proposed to us emerge somewhere in the marketplace. So they'll literally just...
The other thing is, like, he's about to say this, but they will just call around these non-Indigenous businesses and they'll offer like 6-figure salaries to an Indigenous person to run your own business. And they just sit back, smile and wave events, but actually have no ownership or authority in the business. The other thing that people don't really question is a lot of our mob come from low socioeconomic backgrounds. So this could be their big opportunity. That's how it's sort of pitched. Here's your big opportunity. Break the cycle. Break the poverty cycle. And it comes with a whole, spectrum of pain that could happen to you. Ones that I see who have done this before, who've had existing profiles, artists, chefs, footy players, I think they've got a bit of weight behind them to combat and bring a bit of, to broker some of that power. But an average, everyday blackfella who just come off the street or is working in government or community service, you don't know what you don't know, so it's pretty dangerous.
Ring through until they get somebody to do it. I actually don't blame the Aboriginal person to sign up for that, because for them, you need money and someone knocks on your door and says, here, I'm going to give you $5,000 a month, you don't have to do anything. They're just going to sign it because they don't have that level of business knowledge or legal expertise to know what they're actually signing up for. And I have really big fears that if they sign on as a director and they're not involved in the business day to day, they're just the 51% owner according to ASIC, that the other party's going to run up bills on these mob and they're not going to know it's coming.
Coolin Briggs certainly didn't see
Coolin.
it coming. His nightmare arrived in the form of a demand from the tax office for more than $700,000, all because he accepted a role as director of the Indigenous arm of an electrical contracting business, which collapsed and is in liquidation. Were you paid at all for this role, and did you ever attend any board meetings?
Yeah, so from the start of my role as a director in August of 2023, from day one through to when I resigned, 5 or 6 months later, I was never paid a cent for my time as a director.
Were you given
Pause. Now, I'm not going to scroll back because I'm going to go off my brain, but I'm pretty sure at the start, it was sort of pitched that he didn't know he was a director. Someone correct me in the comments. But I thought that was the angle, but now it's like he signed on as a director, but then he wasn't paid, so he was an unpaid director, which is still unfair, because if you wear all the risk but you get none of the reward, then defeats the whole purpose why you'd sign up. So anyway, someone correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but I'm just going to remember, I don't want to scroll back and be like auto-correcting myself. I just want to go with the flow here.
financial accounts showing what the company was earning and spending?
I was never given access to that. I was never told or shown where the money of the business was going towards. And in hindsight, looking back at it now, myself and my fellow director were brought on board, I believe so, to just tick that box of the business being majority Indigenous operated.
Did you ever think that you would ever, be involved in a situation like this?
I never thought that I would ever be a victim of black cladding.
Fellow director, me and a fellow director. So there's two potential victims in this business that was doing $7 million worth of electrical trade. if I've got the tax statements correct.
That was the last thing on my mind. The business was sold to me in the best way. A not-for-profit, Indigenous-operated electrical organisation that creates platforms for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to embark on a career that helps change lives. So when it's sold to me like that, that's the last thing that's on my mind. I'm never going to question whether or not it's a black-letter business because of the way it was portrayed.
It can be very attractive to be.
So last time I checked, Bureau of Statistics said we're about Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, about 3% of the Australian population, 24 million people. So it's always to me a red flag when they're like, we're going to create this entity that employs Indigenous people, and we're going to make sure this industry, let's say construction, is 10% Aboriginal people, and then someone over at the engineers for Without Borders or whoever, engineers for blackfellas are like, we're going to have 10%. And someone else said, we're going to have 10%. So if you actually do the math, you will have an overrepresentation and one of the other. So I always think that, listen, if you've got an Indigenous business and you've got around 2-3% of your staff, like that's an achievement, man. Like that's the median like you've got in your business. If you have an overrepresentation, that's great. And there should be a case study to look what maybe culturally more attractive industries bring Indigenous people into. You look at ranger programs, fisheries, anything that's connected to country, bush foods. These are the ones that need to be really started because they're the ones that are giving not just employment but a purpose. I think it's hard to say like, all right, you go work on a site for 6 days a week and be happy, So it's hard one to balance here, and that pitch when it comes through sounds great. Yes, more Indigenous people getting jobs, having deadly cribs like Coolin has with his biggie smalls, print up on the wall and his deadly furniture. That could be attractive, especially if you haven't seen that as a mob. If you grow up in housing and you come from that environment and you see another successful Indigenous person, you're like, man, I really want to do that. How did you get there? And that's when these sort of sharks come in and be like, oh, well, have I got a deal for you? And I think this is where, at the start, we had the chambers and Supply Nation and different bodies. I think there isn't enough information before someone steps into business, because this is all quite new since 2015, the Indigenous Procurement Policy. So IBA, ILC, they're trying to react in real time, and they're government organizations, so big ships, little rudders, they turn slow. So they're trying to preempt getting people into a good ethical business before that happens. And I wonder if that's what Kaja's about to say here.
Offered a very prominent position in a business. So when opportunities in business are presented, they can look very, very tempting. And I think that's how some people end up in situations of black cladding.
TSI.
Welcome to the biggest trade show, Connect 2023.
The IPP, the Indigenous Procurement Policy, was established by the Federal Coalition Government in 2015. It gave the job of administering the scheme not to public servants, but to an existing non-government organisation, Supply Nation.
Their current definition defines an Indigenous business as 50% or more Indigenous owned. So for us, that is looking through the paperwork, and we have a dedicated team of about 10 people that would work with a business to prove through confirmation of Aboriginality and ownership documents that the business owners do meet that criteria.
Notice how she said ownership and not management. This is the prickly part, because if you say, like I've got one business I have ownership in with another Indigenous person. I'm across AGMs and a few meetings that require my input. I'm not a registered director. I'm just an owner. But I do have some sort of, responsibility to turn up when asked to sort of as a shareholder. So that's an Indigenous business. If that was with a non-Indigenous person, I would be, knowing what I know now, I'd probably be uncomfortable leaving, because it's just not like, all right, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. It's the cultural IP, right? It represents an ancient and strong people. So if you trust it to someone else who doesn't come from that environment, that is culturally risky, I would say, is a word. I think I just made something up. But there is provision, like she just said, to own, because you could own some businesses, or say you exit one business and you have cash, so you invest in multiple, but you don't own. So it's important that you can still get your Supply Nation certification if you want to. That's important. That would be my, important that. And then the managing side, something you'll see if you go to a Supply Nation, it's actually next week, is people say 100% Indigenous owned and managed as sort of like their value proposition to the next guy who's just owned but not managed. So interesting. Looks like we're back.
This means
to
that unlike Bungie Enterprises, as long as the
coffee
company shareholding
or
is
Bungie.
50% black, then it can qualify as an Indigenous business and seek lucrative contracts through the IPP. A stronger standard is required to show not just
this
ownership,
PlayStation
but
shirt.
effective Indigenous control of an enterprise.
This is where we define a certified
Ooh,
Indigenous
sound
business
effects. That was pretty
as
cool.
51% or more owned, managed and controlled by an Indigenous person.
And what is the
Hold
supply
up.
nation position about late
Hold up.
identifiers?
We are not the black police. I am not the black police. If someone
Black
can
boys,
provide
black boys.
an acceptable form of documentation to prove their indigeneity, as I said, the preferred form across most government organisations is a confirmation of Aboriginality. We don't believe that it is our position to cast.
Another prickle. Another prickly. Okay, so there's a term in our community called Johnny Come Lately. And that's when someone who's never disclosed that they're actually Aboriginal by genetics come out and say, lo and behold, I'm Aboriginal. And then the very next day they start an Aboriginal business. It's a bit of it's a hard one because, like, you look at, like, those Aussie pizza chains. They're big here in Victoria, right? You walk in there, no one's Italian. And they're like, do you like egg on your pizza? So it's culturally an Italian product. Well, it's associated, but it's like an Australian version. But you know what you're getting. With the Indigenous side, if you see a piece of artwork, uniqiue, didgeridoo, you usually assume that that's from an Indigenous person somewhere. And you look at, like, those markets where you had Chinese or Balinese knockoffs, you know, they were not Indigenous, but they looked like, and people felt they were getting an Indigenous cultural item. So it goes back to what she's saying. So if someone comes and says they're Indigenous and they've discovered that through, like, Ancestry.com or whatever it is, that's awesome. Congrats. Welcome. However, it doesn't factor in growing up being one of XYZ Indigenous people in a non-Indigenous environment, especially from regional areas in this country. And I'm talking outside of Sydney and Melbourne. Growing up, you're Aboriginal, Anglo-Australian, maybe Filipino, couple of Islanders. So you were distinctively, especially if you had different features, different. And you wore that. You copped the jokes about having a bog nose, about your mum's a gin, about, you know, you're only good at sport because you're black, not because you worked hard. So you wore that, and that shapes your character. So another issue is we have people coming in and they're saying they're part of the collective or the cohort, but they haven't had the lived experience. And that's when you get difficulties, because you've got those people running businesses, and then on top of that, then the businesses are like 50-50 with a non-Indigenous partner. So it keeps getting watered down. So then the experience, and you sometimes will hear corporates, and I've heard corporates tell me about events that they've been to, that it felt very, we've got to be careful, it felt very disingenuine. And some of these corporates work across the tens of millions of dollars in revenue and work in culturally sensitive environments. So there's a lot of work to do on our end, whether that's what she just said, public servants aren't doing the auditing, like Indigenous non-for-profit is, but that has its challenges, because then you can have different traditional owner groups. The other challenge is, so say you grow up, like myself, you grow up in regional Queensland, you know where your mob's from, your grandfather's from, your nana's from, but your traditional owner group hasn't actually had their self-determination. They haven't actually been recognised by the authority in this country that recognize traditional owner groups, only recently, Cubby. So a confirmation of Aboriginality, could I get one? You know, what if my family had issues with that certain group and they don't want to give me one? Because that's what's happened to other people. They're like, I don't like you, mob. Nah, you're not here. You're not from here. Your ancestors are from, you know, XYZ. So that's the other challenge. So I've had our neighbours to one of our clans who's an elder, and they have their determination write a stat deck. And I used that early days. I could probably go get my confirmation now because Cubby has come a long way. However, I know some groups won't accept that. So you're really stuck, you know, and it's twofold here. Stolen generation. who, you could even say full blood, walk in, clearly a blackfellow. Can you show me you're Aboriginal? You know? So it's like, this gets really tough, and this flowing, and this will probably, Supply Nation, Gen 1, 2015, 2016, Gen 2 will probably now, like recently going, a lot of younger people, millennials, Gen Z. Interesting what happens after this, because I know mob who are cultural, live on country, produce cultural products, and make a lot of money going direct to consumer, and they're not associated with these groups. So that's another thing to consider, that there are other Indigenous people who work abroad turning over millions of dollars, and they're not associated with these groups. So it's a very interesting conundrum. They want to buy some furniture. This is not sponsored. There's no way. I've got like 20 followers. I'm just doing this because I can't post this on LinkedIn because it's way too long. So
Dispersions on someone's identity if they are able to prove that with an appropriate documentation.
Demonstrating indigeneity is one thing.
Indigeneity.
Knowing whether First Nations people actually manage and control a business is considerably more difficult, hence the potential for black cladding. So how rife is this?
I would say it's a lot deeper than people want to give it credit for.
For sure.
I would probably nearly put the line through probably a third of the Aboriginal businesses that are certified today.
We've had 30 complaints.
I don't disagree. The other challenge you've got to understand is people aren't going to self-report because you have a target on your head. You become a squeaky wheel in whatever organization you're in. Oh, on about black cladding again. You also have these black clad businesses. Their partners are not small fish and are influential and have a way bigger cash balance and longer established networks, sometimes multi-generational. So if you want to set up and go, oh, those fellows are, then expect to be targeted.
Black cladding in 5 years, all of which have been investigated and none of which have been substantiated. That's not to say that it doesn't exist, but it does say that I think Supply Nation has a very good process, including our auditing system, to make sure that it doesn't happen.
People say, why is Supply Nation letting black-cladded businesses come out and operate as if they are an Aboriginal business? Why don't they do something about it? The thing is, Supply Nation don't really have strong enforcement powers. How can you deter black cladding if all you can do is take away certification?
I think anywhere there's an avenue to revenue that's not policed adequately, any good commercial operator would take advantage of that.
Should the state and regional Indigenous business organisations have a greater role in...
I'm curious, just like straight up, he's just like, anyone decent would take advantage of that. It's a market advantage. Supply Nation essentially just said, we the auditors will audit ourselves. It's like self-audit. Maybe because they don't have, again, the enforcement as well, the bite. And then here's the other challenge. Blackfellas want self-determination, self-governance. Will we hand that over to a third party who's non-Indigenous? Sort of catch-22.
In verifying which businesses are genuine?
Yeah, look, good question. So the individual chambers have come together to form the National Indigenous Business Chambers Alliance. And our key mandate on that is that if a business that represents themselves as Indigenous, one of the chambers should know the Indigenous owner, know their background, but also know their association with the business.
Have you made complaints to Supply Nation?
We've made many complaints, and the feedback sort of falls pretty flat.
What's been their response?
Their response is they meet the criteria. So therefore our response is maybe the criteria needs to be changed.
And what have they said to that?
Nothing.
Is your business suffering because of the criticisms, I guess, that you've talked about with regards to Supply Nation?
Yeah, we've had some hits from a few corporates because we're sort of been sort of very public and outwardly challenging the system as well. For us, we sort of put it to one side and just try and trade and just make really good coffee.
So the Supply Oz guys, Bungie, I think they vocalized a frustration that has been in this community since 2015. And that is we're wanting greater requirements and knowledge on these people that join. Like Kieran just said, we got to know the Indigenous partner, we got to know their background, we got to know where their mob's from. You know, we got to know if there's any skeletons in the closet, because there's some groups, I know our chamber here at Kinaway have turned away after doing a quick little Google search and finding out, hey, this guy's got a bit of a history, you know, a bit of complaints from the not-for-profit sector or something, you know, generic example. But that seems to be, like Adam said, it's who are you going to tell? So if you pipe up some of the businesses that you have or existing businesses you're working with, then they're like, oh, I don't want to be associated because they might drag us in to the vortex.
And work from there.
Did Supply Nation try to stop you from talking to Living Black about this?
Wow. I think the best way for me to answer it is I don't think they were big fans of me sitting here talking to you today.
Coming up are some companies claiming to be Indigenous getting an inside track on lucrative contracts.
That was quicker. Covered a lot of ground on that one. Closing remark. So, said the inside track, which she's going to talk about next, but like Adam said, a lot of the black cladding comes from, in my experience, on the Indigenous side, people who work in ASX 250 or federal state. And so they're able to walk out with their IP, find a partner, walk back into their previous place of employment, and just start cleaning house, making deals that you look at and go, how did a business been around for 3 years just close one of the ASX 250's entire service contract for X, Y, Z? And that's the frustrating part, because if you're an Indigenous business owner, you're not an Indigenous sports person, Indigenous artist, Indigenous public servant, you're an Indigenous business owner who's built their career working for yourself, it can be a kick in the guts. And that's all for today. And I will get the third part done and post up to you guys in the next couple of days. So hope you enjoyed it.